Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to pop the hood on the economy. And look, forget all the crazy jargon and confusing charts for a second. We're going to give you a simple, really powerful dashboard so you can see what's actually going on. Ready? Let's jump in.
So when you hear people talking about the economy, what comes to mind? Is it this finely tuned engine, a speeding car just humming along perfectly? Or does it sound more like a clunker that's about to break down? It's really hard to tell most of the time, but what if you had a dashboard that just gave you a clear, simple reading?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to build today. We are looking at the economy's dashboard, a handful of key indicators that honestly tell you almost everything you need to know about its health. So let's take a look under the hood.
Okay, so here's the big idea. Think of the entire economy as one giant vehicle. Now, I know it seems impossibly complex, but just like with any car, we can get a really good sense of its performance just by looking at three crucial gauges on its dashboard.
All right, first up on our dashboard is the speedometer. This is the gauge that tells us how fast the whole thing is moving, or, in economic terms, how fast it's growing. And we measure this with something you've probably heard of called GDP. So, GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. This is the big one. It's basically the total price tag of everything a country makes and sells in a year, from the cup of coffee you bought this morning to the giant skyscraper being built downtown. A higher speed, a higher GDP, usually means more jobs, more income, a better standard of living. Now, is it a perfect measure? No, of course not. It doesn't tell us about things like happiness or inequality, but it is the best speedometer we've got.
And just look at the difference in speed here. Between 2010 and 2019, you had China's economy absolutely flying down the fast lane, growing at an average of 7.3% every single year. At the same time, you have a more mature economy like France, kind of cruising along at a much slower 1.4%. Now that difference might seem small, but when you compound it over years and years, it has a massive, massive impact on a country's wealth and all the opportunities available to its people.
So what's a normal speed then? Well, historically speaking, for the world's most developed economies, a steady 2% growth per person per year has been that magic number. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? But over 2 centuries, that quiet, steady 2% is what literally transformed societies from agricultural poverty into modern prosperity. It's the engine of progress, right there in that little number.
Okay, next gauge. Let's talk about the check engine light. Because if GDP is our speedometer, then the unemployment rate, well, that's a critical warning signal for the health of our economic engine.
A rising unemployment rate isn't just a statistic. It's a sign that the engine is really struggling. It means people who want to work, who are out there looking for jobs, just can't find them. That means wasted human potential, lost income, and a system that just isn't running the way it should be.
And this quote, this really gets to the heart of why that check engine light is so important. It highlights the profound human cost behind the numbers. Losing a job affects everything, not just your bank account, but your health, your family, your sense of who you are. It's a statistic with a very heavy human price.
So does that mean the goal is 0% unemployment? Well, not exactly. Think of it like a busy city. There are always going to be people moving between jobs, switching careers, or just entering the workforce. Just like there are always cars in transit. In early 2022, economists figured that for the US, that natural level of movement was around 4.6%. It's when the actual rate starts climbing way above that number that the warning lights really start flashing red.
All right, let's look at our third and final gauge on the dashboard. This is the temperature gauge. It tells us if the economic engine is running at a nice, smooth temperature or if it's in serious danger of overheating. And this, of course, is inflation.
Simply put, inflation is when prices for everything start to rise and your money just doesn't buy as much as it used to. A little bit of inflation, kind of like a warm engine, is generally seen as a good thing for an economy. It's when that gauge starts creeping up into the red zone, that's when you've got a real problem on your hands.
And this slide right here shows you just how badly an engine can overheat. On the left, you've got what most developed countries aim for, a nice, stable 2% inflation. But on the right, you have Zimbabwe in November of 2008. The temperature gauge didn't just break, it completely melted down. A monthly inflation rate of nearly 80 billion%. A loaf of bread cost $550 million. It's an unimaginable number. And it's a terrifying example of why keeping that temperature gauge under control is so critical.
So we have our dashboard, right? We've got GDP,
unemployment, and inflation. But this vehicle, this car, it doesn't just drive itself. So who's actually behind the wheel trying to keep this thing on the road and out of a ditch?
Turns out there are two drivers, and each one has their own set of controls. First, you've got the government. They use what's called fiscal policy. Think of their tools as the gas pedal and the brakes. They can hit the gas by cutting taxes or spending more money, or they can tap the brakes by raising taxes or cutting spending. Then, the second driver is the central bank, like the Federal Reserve here in the US. They use monetary policy, and their main tools are things like interest rates and controlling the money supply to either cool things down or heat things up.
Let's see one of these drivers in action, okay? So let's say the economy is sputtering. It's in a recession. The central bank can step in. They start by buying things like government bonds from commercial banks. What that does is it pumps more money into the banking system. With more cash on hand, banks can afford to lower interest rates. And lower interest rates? Well, that's meant to encourage you and me to borrow money for a car or a business to borrow money for a new factory, basically to get the whole economic engine firing on all cylinders again.
So we have our gauges and we have our drivers. But why does any of this matter? Why is it important for you to understand this simple dashboard?
Here's the bottom line. The economy isn't some mysterious, unknowable black box. By just focusing on these three key gauges, our speedometer, our check engine light, and our temperature gauge, you can get a surprisingly clear picture of its health. And when you hear on the news that the government is changing taxes or the Fed is adjusting interest rates, you'll know what's happening. You'll know the drivers are at the wheel, trying to steer the car. This dashboard is your key to decoding the headlines and making sense of the world.
And that leaves us with one last thought. These gauges, they aren't just abstract data points. They're telling a story about our shared past, our present, and our future. They influence our jobs, our savings, our biggest life decisions. So the real question is, now that you know how to read the dashboard, what story is it telling you? And are we paying attention? Thanks for tuning in.